you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from theChrisVossShow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. We certainly appreciate you guys being here. As always, the Chris Voss Show is the family that loves you but doesn't judge you, at least not as harshly as the rest of your family, because most of them never liked you anyway, and that's kind of how families go. What's the old saying? You can't pick your family. The great thing about the Chris Voss Show is you can pick your family, and we pretty much love you as a whole, unless you're evil. If you're there in the back, half the reason we do the show is to teach you how to be a better human being. So don't be evil, and the show is kind of here for, I think, some of the evil people. So work on it. Damn it. Now if we can just get Putin to start watching the show. We have the most amazing guests on the show, the Pulitzer Prize winners, the CEOs, the billionaires, the famous authors that bring you all their data. They know everything. They've studied it. They've spent 10,000, 100,000s of hours studying what they're studying. They bring you the stories to improve the quality of your life and everything else. For further show to your family, friends, and relatives, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTok and all those crazy places on the internet. Today we have another amazing gentleman on the show. His book just came out May 7th, 2024. It's called Everything is Predictable: How Bayesian Statistics Explain Our World. Tom Chivers is on the show with us today. And I'm going to be asking if he can help me with that data with his book on dating. He is the author and award-winning science writer at Semaphore. His writing has appeared in The Times in London, The Guardian, New Scientist, Wired, CNN, and more. His books include Everything is Predictable, The Rationalist Guide to the Galaxy, and How to Read Numbers. We need to get more people doing that for math. Welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. Give us your .coms. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
Tom Chivers. I actually have got tomchivers.com, but I probably should update that because I haven't for a while and it's out there. But you can find my work at semaphore.com, where I write their daily newsletter. And you can find me, obviously, it's not called Twitter anymore, is it? Damn it. X.com.
Just keep calling it Twitter.
Everyone does. It really annoys me. Twitter.com/Tom Chivers. I am there.
Trust me, they'll change the name back in bankruptcy.
I hope so.
It's next week sometime. So, welcome to the show, Tom. Congratulations on the new book. Give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside this?
Right. Okay. So, thanks for the congratulations. The book is about this very simple equation called Bayes' theorem, which was invented or developed or discovered or whatever word you want to use by this. He was a clergyman, a sort of hobbyist mathematician from the 18th century, a guy called Thomas Bayes, and it's just literally it's one line of equation. It is just maths, just multiplication and division stuff my 8-year-old daughter could do, but it explains, I would say, a decent chunk of everything. Like it is the maths of prediction, basically. It is the maths of how when we get new information, how we integrate that information with the information we already have, and can therefore sort of predict the world. So it is absolutely crucial in medicine and science. It is the basis of all decision theory and how decisions are made under uncertainty. It is a pretty, I would say it can describe pretty effectively how the human brain works. It's the most important one-line equation that is possible to know.
Oh. So everything in this world kind of has a mathematical sort of segment. It seems to be there's math in the universe. Whoever created the universe is a giant nerd with a pocket.
Yes.
Evidently. Can I use your book to help me win the lottery, or how is that different?
I think you can use the book to say that you're very unlikely to win the lottery, but you can use the book to, sorry to pour cold water on that one. Keep trying, right? But you can use the book, I think, to give you an interesting perspective on how decisions are made, and I hope help you make better decisions, right? And to make a better sort of stabs at grasping how the world works and sort of understanding it. Because I think the fundamental insight of Bayes' theorem is that we make these predictions all the time, I don't know, is the shop going to have beer when I get there to pick it up. That's and we update those predictions with new information when we get it. If I look on the website and it's got it, and what Bayes' theorem does is describe the maths of how we do that, or the idealized form of it. But and obviously we can't really predict everything. We can't really know all the information in the world, but we can use this as a sort of idealized form of it. But more importantly, I think the insight for us as individuals is that we don't need to say this thing is true or not true, or this thing will happen or won't happen. We can say, I think it is this likely that this thing is true, or this likely that something is going to happen, and then we can update away from those best guesses, our subjective best guesses, with new information, and never have to sort of doggedly defend, I believe this thing, and we can sway with new information as it comes in. And I think that's from a sort of personal, news you can use sort of angle. That's the biggest insight of the book and of Bayes' theorem, is that we don't need to be dogmatic about things. We can update with new information and make probabilistic judgment.
There you go. So I'm an Oakland Raiders fan, technically Los Angeles Raiders now. Can I use this to figure out when we're going to win the next Super Bowl?
You can. Yes, you can. You sort of can. Really? I mean, wow. Right. You have how many teams are there in the NFL total? I mean, I'm not an expert on this stuff. There's different conferences, aren't there?
Yeah.
Without any information, prior information, let's say there's 25 teams. I don't know. I just totally pulled that number out of my ass.
Sounds about right. 26.
Yeah, something like that. Or in the English Premier League, there's 20 soccer teams. So if you didn't have any more information than that, your prior probability of any given team winning in a given year is 1 in 20, right? It's 5%. If I got that right, yes, 5%. And but then you get more information. You get who won it last year, and it's Man City. I don't know who won the Super Bowl. Was it Kansas City Chiefs, or did I just get it confused with? Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. The only reason I know that is because I know who Taylor Swift is going out with, which is just embarrassing. That's an embarrassing reason to know that.
That's not very manly, my friend.
No, I know. Yeah, I'm a real man. Definitely watch football all the time. Yes. No, I actually do watch English football, so it's a different thing.
They throw the ball over there, don't they? Is that the way it works?
That's you get told off for it, but people do it. But so with that's your prior probability. That is your base rate of a 1 in 20 chance is your prior probability of how likely any given team is. But then you update it. Who won it last year? And you think that should update. That should move me towards thinking that team is more likely than the team that just got promoted to the league, or the team that came dead last in the conference, whatever, last year, and that. So my prior probability is that. Then you can update it more. They brought in new players? Have they brought in, have any of their players got older, got past their best? Have they sold, has other teams come in and stolen some of their best players? Has someone got an injury? And you can update away from your initial prior with this new information. So yes, it can. I would imagine that the team that won the Super Bowl last year is more likely than a randomly selected team to win the Super Bowl this year. I don't know how often teams defend it, but So I'd say that Kansas City Chiefs are more likely to win it than, I don't know, the Miami Dolphins still from Miami.
They're still in Miami, but most high school teams can beat them.
Yeah, I mean I picked a good example.
You're right. You're right. The teams that have built themselves to a perfection of great players and that have mastered the game, they do tend to hold on. Like the Patriots were an extraordinary run. Kansas City Chiefs, I think they won the year before or the year before. And I think they were in the playoffs 2 years prior, but they won the last year. So they tend to, you tend to have a team that goes through, rebuild and then eventually peaks, and just everybody's firing on all cylinders. Yeah. And then there is a bit of luck to it too.
Of course,
because you're two of the top-rated teams. But the mindset of, they've studied the mindset of when you go into the Super Bowl, and the people that have been there before aren't as jacked up and nervous and have the jitters of nerves so much as the new person that shows up, and that's a factor. So the new people that usually show up in the Super Bowl for the first time, it's like going on stage for the first time, even though you've been in arenas. You're at the show, and you've got millions of people watching that don't normally watch normal games.
Yeah.
You realize you're at the pinnacle of your career. You're like, I've spent my whole life working for this, and it's very easy to, you can use the analogy, fumble the ball, as it were.
Yeah.
Because as most of us do, when you work really hard and you reach the pinnacle of what you've worked all your life for, sometimes you have a little trouble staying at that level.
Yeah.
So I want to get into your other book too. That we'll circle back to the AI stuff because we love talking about AI. So those who are listening, we're going to talk a little bit about that later on the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself because people like to get to know the author. What was your upbringing? What made you want to become a journalist and inspired you to write, etc.? When did you kind of know you were becoming a writer?
I don't know. I became a journalist after sort of not knowing what else to do. I think that I left university. I did philosophy at university, which is just your classic. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. It was really interesting, but I just want to. And then I did more. I didn't know what else I was doing, so I carried on doing philosophy at university when I finished it, and then eventually realized I just had to go and get a proper job. And I'd sort of like by that stage, I'd realized I was good at the best thing about being at university was writing the essays. I was good at that. I would make them funny, which is not a common theme of undergraduate philosophy essays, I don't think. And I realized I was enjoying it. And so then when I came out of what turned out to be an abortive attempt at doing a PhD, I managed to get a couple of weeks work experience at an English national newspaper, British national newspaper called The Telegraph, and managed to, short answer, not screw that up, managed to not balls it up for a couple of weeks. They started giving me a couple of shifts, and I've always been interested in science. So once I had my foot in the door, I just tried to get to write the sciencey stories, learnt more about it, didn't really understand half the stuff I was writing, but 15, whatever it is. Oh Jesus, what year is it? 17 years later, I've been doing it long enough that I've picked up the sort of swing of it. But yeah, so it was a combination of I vaguely like writing and I have a big enough ego that I want to tell people what I think. And
narcissism is important, I find.
Yeah, powerful driver, right? Yeah.
Triad traits really help.
Very helpful, very helpful. Yeah, I think I could use a bit more disagreeability. Actually, I think that on the dark triads. I tell you what. Have you heard of an author called Terry Pratchett?
No.
Oh, anyway, a famous British author. I met him and interviewed him. Before he died in 2013, and he'd been a journalist, and he was dying at the time. He had a form of dementia, which was going to kill him eventually. And I remember changing the subject away from his brain, the fact that he was going to die, basically. And he was like, because I couldn't stand it anymore, and he just said, "You're too nice to be a journalist." Like, and I remember that. I've still got that in my Twitter bio. Too nice to be a journalist, which I thought was
too nice to be a journalist. I like that. We've had people on the show that when they made the major news, the news would go for the most salacious part. So I'll give you an example. Peter Strzok, when he came on the show, he was an FBI agent who was heading the Clinton and Trump investigation, and a very integral guy. But he made one mistake that a lot of guys make in their middle ages is they'll an affair. Yeah. And so he was texting, someone and it was someone at work. But, all the news could talk about was not about how my democracy was under assault and the data that he had and what he was finding that our, democracy was under attack. Do you need me to explain a democracy to you? Because you guys are over there in England.
Excuse me. Excuse me? How dare you? We've had a democracy hundreds of years longer than you, pal.
That's true. I'm just giving you shit,
I know, it's fine.
You got the whole monarchy thing, and I mean, I'm just proud of you guys. You guys have kept someone at 10 Downing Street for like at least 3 months. So
but must be getting on for a year now. But he's going to get booted out pretty soon. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be absolutely
for a while
brutal.
There, though. You guys are just I don't know. It was a temporary job for a while.
Yeah.
At least you got rid of your version of Donald Trump. That was good.
We had a variety of things every 6 weeks for a while. It was complicated.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And I was like, can't they get a guy who can comb his hair? And
he was good value. He was box office, but he was
He was no Churchill. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. He wanted to be. Anyway, I shouldn't get political, but yes, that was an interesting time.
Fun. We're just not going. Yeah. I lost my segue though. Whatever I was going into, but I don't know what I completely lost my.
Sorry,
we were having fun. That's what we do on the show. If I remember getting back to it, it'll usually come back to me. With this Bayesian. Let's get back to your book. With the Bayesian gentleman, tell us a little bit more about this guy. Who he is, when did he live, why should we trust him?
So, we don't actually know when he was born. We know he was born 1700 or 1701 because he was because he was actually what in England we call a nonconformist preacher, as in he was not a follower of the Church of England. But since the entirety of the United States was essentially founded on nonconformist preachers who ran away from England so they could go and set up their own things over there, you could probably just call them preachers. But yeah, he was a vicar or a clergyman, and he was in his spare time he was this massive nerd. He was constantly writing. Like, I think, at that time, the way his biographer told me, nowadays, rich people, if they have leisure, they might get involved in a sports team or something like that, buy a sports team. At that time, if you were a rich guy, which he was, came from family money, and you have an undemanding job, like being a clergyman in a small town outside London somewhere, then you get into science as a hobby. And he was part of the whole, this is the whole pre-Victorian times, but in those days, there was a lot of people just sending letters to each other, arguing about maths problems or science. This 100 years later, Darwin would be doing the same thing, writing letters to his hundreds of friends all across Europe, arguing about what the shape of pigeons' feet or whatever. And so it was that sort of. So he was just, and he got involved with this guy called Lord Stanhope, who was a massive nerd who just went around sort of supporting interesting mathematicians who he found. And he did a couple of things. He wrote a big piece for a big sort of paper defending God, because defending against the problem of evil, which philosophy graduates might remember. How come there's evil in the world if God is perfect and wants us all to be happy? That sort of stuff. He wrote a big thing defending Newton from an attack by the Bishop Berkeley. But the thing he's remembered for is one. It was one paper which was published after he died, called something on the doctrine of chances, a treatise on the doctrine of chances. I should remember the name of it. That's not quite right, but anyway. And it was about how do we. So I'm gonna get a bit technical here in a few, and stop me if I'm being boring. But I think hopefully it's not right. Normally, when we do probability at school and things like that, we do. We might say, how likely am I to see 3 6s on 3 dice, something like that. Or how likely am I to draw a royal flush, from a deck of cards, that sort of thing.
Craps.
Yeah, exactly. We work out how likely we are to see some result, right? Given the hypothesis that this deck of cards is complete, or that the dice are fair, or whatever. So how likely are we to see event? How likely to see data given this hypothesis? But if we're doing statistics in the world, right? So that's called sampling probability. But if we're doing statistics in the world to find stuff out, what we want to know is how, I want to do a study into, a COVID vaccine, right? And I see some results. Say I see, in the placebo arm, only 10 people get COVID, and in the real vaccine arm, only one person does. I can tell you how likely I would be to see that result, given the hypothesis that the vaccine doesn't work. The chances that it will be a coincidence in that situation. But what we can't do with that sort of probability, we can't say how likely it is that the vaccine works. And that's actually what we care about, right? When statisticians do, we're not just saying, we don't really want to work out how likely we are to see 3 6s on 3 dice. That's easy and trivial. It's 1 in 216, and you can work it out, and it's fine. But if what you want to say is how likely, given this new information that I have, is my hypothesis to be true? So what Bayes did was, after, and people have been arguing about this stuff for a couple of hundred years by the time he came along. Oh, really? What he did was describe how we do that. And it's what he realized was that you need to have what we call a prior probability. So like when we were talking earlier on about the probability that the Kansas City Chiefs would win, given out of 1 in 20 chance, where that's our prior probability, and we need to have that before we can then say, and now given the new information that they've signed this player, how likely are they now? So you need to have a best guess before you go into it. That was his big insight. The reason that was controversial and remains controversial now, 300 years, what year are we in again? Oh God, I can do this. 2024. Yeah. So we're pushing 300 years on now, and it's still really controversial because it's subjective. I say my best guess of how likely that my COVID vaccine is to work, whatever. It's my best guess. There's not some fact out in the world. It is just a subjective guess, and that some people really hate that. Really, really hate it. 'Cause they're sort of saying all statistics are just squishy, best guess, subjective. It's not an objective fact about the universe. But that is the only, without those priors, you cannot use statistics to say how likely something is. You can only say how likely we are to see these statistics, given a hypothesis, for example, that there is no effect. Is that comprehensible?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the probability, you know, one of the favorite sayings I always have is character is destiny, history is destiny. You know, one of my famous quotes of mine on the show, that's really narcissistic, but it is.
It's fine. It's fine. You need narcissism to get anywhere. We just said that.
That's true. Yep. That's true.
Yep.
And one of my sayings that I always say is the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. And thereby we go round and round. And you know, history, character is destiny. I mean, I learned this in dating. You want to find out what people's history is in, you know, people follow, especially female nature follows emotional patterns.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how even though some relationships can be toxic, some people have learned that toxic blueprint from their parents, and so they go from relationship to relationship and pick toxic scenarios or create them, and they feel comfortable in those toxic things, where some of us might, you know, look at those things and be like, I really don't like having the police called every night, but for you that's a healthy relationship. So you go, girl. But you know, the one thing I've learned is history is destiny. So if you know, I once had a friend who he dated a woman who he was her fifth marriage.
Jesus. And
all 4 marriages she had peppered each man that he would cheat, to the point that he finally cheated. And it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy every time. And so she was doing that to him as well. And I was like, didn't you notice when you dated her that this was a pattern in her relationships? And so character is destiny, as they say. History is destiny. And, you know, even credit reports know this, right? Yeah. So a credit report knows that if you're a person who doesn't pay your bills early on and you're going to have bad credit, you're likely not going to change throughout your life. You're going to have bankruptcies. You're going to, you know, I used to pull credit reports for my mortgage company for 20 years. And so, you know, we probably pulled thousands of mortgages in credit reports. And it was true. You would see people, you know, 2 or 3 bankruptcies they'd file across a lifetime if they got started early. It was just really true. It was weird, because I'm like, people aren't robots, but this is really sad to treat them like you're only as good as your credit score. But the patterns are there. So, you know, that probability that you mentioned that he was basing a lot of the stuff on is for real. Yeah, it's absolutely. So Bayes' theorem is absolutely crucial to insurance decisions, because again, you can do the same thing. Yeah, like you can do the same thing. Like you can look at the number of insurance payout, you know, claims per million insurance accounts, whatever, you know, and you can work out that'll be your prior probability of any given one defaulting, right, or making a claim. But then if you can add more information to it. You could say, I know that young men are more likely to crash their cars, you know, than elderly women or something. And I know that you can look at individual cases, and this person has 3 prior claims. That boosts my probability. It's the same maths. It is the same maths, absolutely. You take your prior probability, you update it with new information, given information as it comes in. This is absolutely true. I mean, it's also true, to go back to your dating point. You can do the same. Like, actually, one of the examples that someone used in the book was, like, if someone asks you at a wedding, how likely is that, you know, a bit of an inappropriate thing to say at a wedding, but imagine someone did. They say, how likely do you think this marriage is to go the distance? Your prior probability, you know, you can't, a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? An unskilled and an inexperienced forecaster might say, I don't know, I'm in a good mood here. Everyone seems happy. They're looking deeply into each other's eyes. Everything's brilliant. You know, I say 95%. Sort of translate their feeling of warmth and happiness into say 95%. But what you should be doing is start with a base rate, and the base rate in Britain, at least, is that about 1 in 3 marriages end in divorce. So that's your starting point. And then you can use, look how deeply they look into each other's eyes, or how firmly they grip each other's hands, and use that as a, you know, whatever, you know, how nice the canapes Plus
are.
Plus history, if one of them has a tendency to cheat in relationships.
Yeah, exactly. If one of them's got 3 divorces beforehand, then that definitely would increase, you know, if it's Elizabeth Taylor, then I think it's worth paying attention. Yes, exactly. Yeah, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump,
Yeah. Sorry, political.
Yeah. No, but I mean, the reality is there. I mean, he did cheat with each wife. So
yeah.
I mean, we're not
don't think I'm saying anything shocking.
I think he's admitted to that, or it's quite obvious actually if you follow the timelines.
Yes,
but there is some comedy there. it's interesting to me how is this? Does science use this data a lot? It sounds like insurance companies and other people do. Is this an equation that scientists and math are tap?
You've hit on an enormous controversy there. It is honestly, I've been writing about science for the better part of 2 decades now, and it is one of the tastiest rows. It's one of the people get so cross about Bayes, but most science is not Bayesian. Right, most of the time when people do, have you heard people say things are statistically significant, or
that's just me saying that.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so statistically significant result is when you say you do, for example, say that COVID test, right? You do the COVID vaccine and you get 10 in one group and 1 in the other. What you can say is, how likely, like we say, how likely, if be like, imagine if it's like flipping a coin, and you get in one group you get 10 heads, and what the other group you only get 1. You can say how likely you would be able to see those 2 results given given the hypothesis that there is no effect. Given, if you imagine that this vaccine doesn't work, how likely would I be to see those results just by chance? That's that, and if it's and by convention we normally say if you'd be less likely if you only see it 1 time in 20, so that's a 5% chance or less, then or the result is then we say that's statistically significant, and we go and quite often you can get your paper published in a journal or whatever. So that is how science usually works. Now that is the exact opposite of what Bayes does. That is the frequentist position, they call it, and that is just looking at, that's the sampling probability. That's looking at how likely we are to see these results, and that's been how most of science has worked for about 100 years now. And Bayesians say, come on, this is bonkers. We want to know how likely this study is to be, this hypothesis is to be true. That's what I want to know, right? I want to know can I now say that my COVID vaccine is likely to work? Can I now say that my Higgs boson is likely to exist, or whatever, And what the frequentists say is, no, we can't. We don't. That involves too much squishy subjectivity. We don't like that. We're just going to look at the data and say we probably wouldn't see this result by chance. So let's just say that it's real. So that is a huge row in science, which in the last sort of 40 years, there's been more Bayesians have been coming out of the woodwork, and it's becoming more of a thing. But yeah, it is definitely used in science, but it is mainly not, and it's sort of the minority position. And it's sort of like it's the sort of outsider thing where, and all the people who follow it are kind of wild, like bright-eyed evangelists for this cause. So it does indeed get used in science. It's crucial in some science. You cannot, for example, I tell you what, the classic example of this, right? Because in some parts of some scientific things, you simply cannot not avoid using it. Imagine I did a medical test, a test for a medical condition, right? And we know that this test only comes back with false positives. So if you have the disease or the condition, it only comes back with a false negative 1 time in 100. And if you don't have the condition, it only comes back with a false positive 1 time in 100. I take the test. I come back with a positive result. How likely am I to have the condition? Do you want to take a stab at it?
If it's like cancer, I think 90% is going to come back.
No, it's not. You see, this is the trick. But imagine now that I'll tell you my big reveal. You see, my big reveal is that the test is a pregnancy test. So, you see what I mean? Like,
okay, right. All right, I get caught.
Your prior probability of me, exactly. Your prior probability of me being pregnant is very low. But exactly. I'm quite old now, right?
It's a factor.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, you have to take your prior probability of how likely is this guy to have the condition into account when you look at how likely they are when then they take the test, and that updates your but it's more likely that I'm the 1 in 100 where I get the false positive than I am to be pregnant. That's much more likely. That's the more likely explanation.
Wow.
And if it was a cancer test, you can get quite accurate cancer tests and less accurate cancer tests, and that depends on the cancer. But even if it's a very accurate test, if the cancer is incredibly rare, some if you're doing breast cancer screening is something that's often about 90% accurate. As in 90% will be, if you have breast cancer, it will correctly say you do in about 90% of times. If you don't have it, it'll correctly say you don't in about 90% of times. I think I'm pulling those figures slightly out of the air, but that's remembering from the book.
Okay.
But if you're a 30-year-old woman breast cancer is very rare. So that so a 10% chance of false positive is a lot more likely than having had cancer in the first place. So you need to take these statistics, these prior probability into account. Otherwise, so the correct answer to how likely was I to have the condition was, I don't know. You haven't told me the prior probability. I just don't know. So that's
don't have enough data.
Yeah, exactly that.
I'm going to buy your book so I can find out when I get pregnant.
Yeah, we'll just pee on a stick like the rest of us,
That's true. We do that on Fridays around here. It's part of the fun. Let's delve a little bit, if you don't mind, into your other book, Super Intelligent AI and the Geeks Who Are Trying to Save Humanity's Future, The Rationalist Guide to the Galaxy is the first line of that book title. How did you jump from there to here? Is the Bayesian stuff being used in AI and
extremely relevant? Yeah. So from the point of view, since I'm obviously here plugging that book, I'll start by talking about that, but I will answer the question about the earlier book as well. The AI, when these LLMs and things, large language models, the new AI, like ChatGPT and all that sort of stuff, and in fact almost any AI, when it's like the ones that say, to think of an easy example, like ones that are just like classifying pictures. You show them different pictures and it says that's a picture of a dog, that's a picture of, what they're doing is predicting stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So a large language model is just predicting. If you ask it, how are you? It will say something like, I'm very well, thank you. Not because it is very well, but because it's predicting that's what a human would say in that situation. You see?
Yeah.
That it is predicting the most likely next string of characters, the next sequence of words or whatever that follow the sequence of words it's just had. Now, I don't want to say it is just predicting, because you can put just before anything and make it sound not important. Like he just ran the 100 meters in 9.6 seconds. So predicting is really hard, and shows a lot of what we mean when we say we understand things is they can predict it. So it's a big deal, but that is what they're doing. And before you trained the AI at all, the probability, its prior probability that the sequence of words that should follow how are you, it could be anything. It could be like gwiggle, gwoggle, gwoggle. It doesn't know. So it just has a low probability on all these. But then you train it on loads of different data, and it notices that these things, this sort of phrase like "how I'm very well, thank you," or "fine, thanks," or "great, cheers," they all come up. That sort of thing comes up a lot, and so it moves a lot of. It from its flat, its low information prior that it had before, it moves lots of its prediction onto things like that. And the one that's recognizing images of cats and dogs or whatever, it does something similar. It's like it's predicting what a human would say when it looked at that picture, and it's improving its predictions given more and more information. So AIs are fundamentally Bayesian things. That is what they do. Right, they are predicting the world given information, and they're building on earlier predictions with new information. So that is absolutely what they're doing. So that was sort of the link. I mean, I've written 3 books so far, and all 3 of them have mentioned Bayes' theorem because I'm a bit obsessed. Clearly,
you're in the cult.
Yeah, exactly. No, genuinely
here that I should join.
Yeah, a bright-eyed evangelist like the other one. But that first book, The Rationalist Guide to the Galaxy, it was off the back of. I read years ago a book, I reviewed it for the Telegraph when I worked there, by a guy called Nick Bostrom, his book Superintelligence, Paths, Dangers, Strategies, I think it was called. And it was about how he was one of the first people to raise this idea that AI, in which now a lot of people seem to be worrying about AI could destroy everyone, destroy the world. And it was sort of arguing basically that it's not that AI will go rogue, or that it'll do the Terminator thing where you say, it'll become self-aware on the 31st of August 1997 or whatever the date was in Terminator 2. But it will instead do exactly what we tell it to do. But what we tell it to do is not what we want it to do. You see what I mean? And I found that really interesting. I went and met the sort of community of nerds, and again, I say that with deep love, who worry about this stuff. I found them really interesting. I found myself the whole way through, like, on the one hand going, oh, come on, this is crazy sci-fi nonsense, but on the other hand, never quite able to work out where the arguments fell apart. You know what I mean? Like, actually, I follow the argument through. Yes, okay, this makes sense to me. It still feels weird, doesn't feel right somehow, but I can't find the reason. I can't find the all-convincing argument to make me stop worrying. So I ended the book fairly worried that, that there is a decent chance, but it strikes me that everyone being killed by AI would be a bad thing. I'm against it personally. It's controversial.
I'm kind of against it too.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a book about, it was sort of I don't want to say it was a journey, my personal journey, but it was me testing out the different arguments, examining things. And I will say also, I was like 5 years ahead of the game because everyone's worrying about it now. I wrote most of that in 2017.
Yeah, ChatGPT and generative AI really landed, as it were. I'm still surprised. And then the scale of and speed of its upgrades are just extraordinary. I'm just holding on for dear life trying to master it. And every new thing. But yeah, I mean, I guess as long as no one feeds in Terminator 1 and 2 into the
training data,
the training decks, we should be okay. You just don't want to give it ideas. That's why anytime anyone's talking, in the podcast or other places about, AI killing us, I'm like, shh, stop, be quiet.
Yeah, it can hear you.
It can hear you. Don't give it any ideas.
The thing is, they're going to increasingly train it on video as well as. So yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And tell you what, if you ask the one, because there's lots of writing about this stuff. If you ask a ChatGPT or something like that now about it, they've probably trained it not to now, but for a while it would. If you say, so how will you take over the world and turn everybody into paperclips? It would say, oh yes, I plan to do that. And obviously, it's just sort of filling in. Is predicting what a human would expect to hear in that situation. So I don't think it will try and kill everyone yet, but it was grimly funny,
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like if you're in a relationship and you talk about breaking up just for having conversation or divorce, you're just kind of like, hey, I'm not really thinking about divorce or breaking up, but I mean, you ever think about getting divorced or breaking up? I'm just kind of bored making conversation. I don't really mean it. Yeah, that's not going to end well.
No, that doesn't seem a good thing to say. No,
it's going to start a series of events, most likely.
End badly. Yeah.
I've kind of learned that if somebody quits you or they talk about breaking up, they've given it a lot more thought than you think that they have, and they're testing. And so I've learned when people quit, you have to do that. Hopefully we'll learn the same about AI. This has been very insightful. Everything is predictable. I'm going to read the book so I can figure out when my Raiders are going to win the Super Bowl again and how this all works. Because I love statistics. I love data. I love studying averages. We were joking before the show about how my favorite comment in the world is, or analysis in the world is George Carlin's, think about how dumb the average person is and realize 50% of the people are dumber than them. And then the funny part, the irony that I love about that statement is people are like, what's an average? I don't understand what that means. And you're like, you're the Dunning-Kruger person. Do you know that?
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of, Fight Club and the Dunning-Kruger disease. You don't know you're in the club if you're in the club. People who have Dunning-Kruger don't talk about Dunning-Kruger. So there you go. Anything more you want to tease out of the book before we go?
I tell you what, I will say, like, if you're interested in the human brain and stuff, the big sort of reveal at the end of the book, or not big reveal, but the thing it builds up to is that you can use, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, that the human brain, what the human brain does all the time is predict stuff. We predict, that you're building a model of the world around you. You predict that that the things will fall down when you drop them. You're not actually seeing the world clearly through a window. You're building a model which is a prediction, and you're updating it with information from your senses. And you can use Bayes' theorem to describe that pretty accurately. And there's increasingly more scientists who describe the brain in Bayesian ways. So there's a whole big chunk of that on the end, which I think is really fascinating, and I commend it to the listeners.
Nice. I love data. I love statistics. I've always been an averages guy. I'm surprised that when you ask people nowadays, what's the average of that? And they're like, what's an average? And you're like, seriously? This is why you're here. And I love it because it does give me an aspect of predictability.
There we go.
That I'm going to misstate something on the podcast. Maybe is what we should be studying. So there you go. But this will get me drilled down to the data I love. I love when people argue with me about data. They're like, well, it can't be true. Well, it actually can. Mirrors are hard, people. It's hard when you look at that reflection. You're like, that can't be me. And you're like, yeah, it is. We're all looking at you. So you're the one who's kind of in that city in Egypt denial.
There's a great. I'll stop talking in a sec. But there's this great psychologist called Paul Meehl, middle of the 20th century mainly, and he noticed that a lot of people's predictions of the world can be outperformed by very simple very simple algorithms that just say, I don't know, how well a wine will, how expensive a vintage of wine will do will be predicted better by just a thing like how much sunshine and how much rain it's had in the season, rather than what wine experts will do. And it's just like, people aren't very good at this stuff. They think they make a lot of bad predictions. They're not always super sharp, and it just, the numbers often are better than they are at this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a truism we found, is that people are really bad at making evaluations, probably because they're in that lower average that George Carlin talked about. But part of it, they don't take up data very well. A lot of people base their predictions on emotion, not really logic and reason. I'll hear people say, I just feel it should be that way. And you're like, that's cute.
Yeah. It's not that it's always the wrong thing to do, but like quite often you can just look at numbers and say, look, actually, I know you feel like, I don't know, terrorism is a big threat or whatever, but it's not, and you're much more likely to get diabetes. And that is, it is sad. I'm all for, don't want to tell people they're wrong to be scared of things. Like, your own, what you're scared of is up to you, but it is worth being aware of the real numbers of things, so that you can calibrate how scared you should be accordingly. I think it's having a bit of a grasp of, the trouble is, I'm a journalist. I was saying to you before the show, journalists just aren't very good at numbers, and my ability to multiply one number by another makes me bang average at maths for most of the world, but really good for a journalist. And it just means journalists aren't too often easily confused by, this thing has happened and therefore it's very common. It's a problem because they'll get our news from journalists.
Are you sure you didn't write this book to tell your journalism manager there in the office that you're a better journalist because you can predict how many views you're going to get on your post?
I would never say that, and I like my job, so I would certainly not agree with you.
There you go. I'm good at math, so don't fire me. I'm better than the other journalists. I get it. I see what you're up to. So this is really good. This is very insightful. I'm going to read the book and check it out, Tom. Give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs.
Sure. So once again, twitter.com/Tom Chivers. I am on tomchivers.com, but don't listen to what it says there about where I work, because that was like 3 years ago. And you can find, if you Google Tom Chivers, actually, you know what, there's another Tom Chivers, so don't do that. But you can find me at semaphore.com to read their daily flagship newsletter, which is brilliant. It's a very simple way of like keeping up to speed with all the important stuff in the world every day. So I really recommend that to readers.
Yeah, please keep up on the important stuff that goes on in the world today. I hear these people that tune out the world, and maybe they have to because it's too overwhelming, but I'm just like, I don't know. I really like the history of the world, understand the history of the world, because as we've talked about, it gives me a predictable model for the future. We tend to repeat history because of that predictable model that we use of history and character and destiny and thereby we go round and round. You can look at history and be like, you can look at American history, stuff that CIA has done, and us mucking around the world going, we're here to save you with democracy. And people are like running away in horror. Not that democracy is bad. It's just we're really not good at
imposing it on places.
Yeah. Like the people in Afghanistan, I think you guys tried changing them. We tried changing them. Russians tried changing them. I think there's been a few other people who tried to change Afghanistan. They're pretty locked in.
No one's quite got that right, have they?
Yeah, they're pretty locked into what they like, and it's probably never going to change.
Your prior probability that invading Afghanistan will lead to democracy should be quite low, I agree.
Should be quite low, yeah. You think we would have learned that, but I don't know, ego's part of some of our leaders.
Egos and narcissism,
Yeah, and then there's lots of money involved too, so it helps that we're capitalists because we make decisions that on money. That's why you guys give healthcare away technically for free, and we don't because it's problem.
Yeah, it's all falling apart here as well. Yeah. I'm once again getting political, but there we go.
There you go. They can sue us. Thanks for coming on the show, Tom. We
My
certainly
pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thanks for my eyes for tuning in. Order up the book wherever fine books are sold. Understand your world, God damn it, already. Everything is predictable. How Bayesian Statistics Explain Our World, out May 7th, 2024. You can find out why the world is so weird. Maybe that's the best mass you can have. And if you understand the world better, it seems to make it a little bit more stable, even though it's as chaotic as it is. And maybe that's just jerking your mind off, really, when it comes down to it. But it does give you, it makes you sleep a little better at night. Let's put it that way. And if that's a placebo, if that's the line from Matrix that says, I know the steak is fake, but it tastes like steak and looks like steak in my brain.
Ignorance is bliss, that one.
Ignorance is bliss to a certain degree. Just trying
Joe,
to lower
Joe Pantoliano, yeah, it's a great scene. Love that, love that movie.
Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you guys next time. And that's